She wanted to humiliate me, to make sure every single person in that room knew I was nothing more than her shadow. She laughed with her lover, tossed her hair back, and made sure her hand brushed against his arm while I stood a few feet away. Everyone smirked. Everyone thought I was too weak to do anything about it. But then she realized too late that the stage she built for my humiliation would become the stage for her downfall. If you enjoy stories where betrayal flips into poetic justice, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and leave a comment, because this one will keep you hooked until the very end. The night had been carefully planned, or at least that's what I thought. The hotel ballroom gleamed with chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting the golden glow of the lights, and round tables draped in white linens. Waiters in black and white weaved between guests carrying glasses of champagne that sparkled under the lights. It was the kind of gathering where reputations were sharpened or destroyed in whispers over cocktails. My wife, Emily, insisted we attend, brushing off my hesitation with a quick, "It'll be good for us, Daniel. Besides, everyone will be there." She looked radiant when we walked in, her long blonde hair cascading over one shoulder, her green dress hugging her figure in a way that guaranteed attention. I thought, maybe naively, that this evening might be a chance to reset, to show everyone that behind the rumors we were still united. I smiled politely at colleagues, nodded at acquaintances, and tried to ignore the glances that flicked toward me and then away as though I wasn't worth holding. It didn't take long before I realized Emily had her own agenda. She drifted away from me the moment we crossed the threshold, her laughter carrying across the room louder than it needed to be. I followed the sound with my eyes and saw her standing with Eric Parker, a man I knew well, a little too well. Tall, confident, with that effortless charisma that came from never having to work too hard for anything. His hand rested casually at the small of her back, and she tilted her head up at him, laughing at some remark, her eyes glinting with a spark she hadn't shown me in years. My chest tightened, but I stayed rooted to my spot. I forced a smile when someone passed by and clapped me on the shoulder, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They saw it too. They all did. Emily wasn't subtle. She didn't want to be subtle. She wanted the room to see, and the room obliged, pretending not to stare while they catalogued every brush of her hand against his sleeve, every pointed glance in my direction. I could almost hear the whispers. "Poor Daniel. Can you imagine?" She didn't stop there. When she finally approached me, she made sure her words were sharp enough for the group around us to hear. "Oh, Daniel," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you don't mind that Eric and I were catching up. He's just so much more entertaining than you've been lately." Laughter rippled from the people standing nearby, some uncomfortable, some eager to align themselves with the winning side. I stood there, my face impassive, my jaw tight. She wanted me to break, to lash out, to confirm her version of me as weak, pathetic, forgettable. But I said nothing. I simply nodded, lifted my glass, and sipped. Inside, my anger burned hot and steady, but I wouldn't give her the scene she craved. My silence was deliberate. My calmness was the one thing she couldn't predict. And in that silence, the room shifted. People leaned in closer, waiting for a spark, but it didn't come. That only made Emily louder, more desperate to provoke. Eric, for his part, wore the smug smile of a man who thought he'd won. He whispered something in her ear, and she laughed again, throwing a glance at me as though to twist the knife deeper. The air in the ballroom grew heavy, the music from the string quartet seeming almost too delicate against the sharpness of her laughter. Guests traded glances, the tension at our table a current that ran under the polished surface of the evening. I stood still, my hands steady around the glass, my face unreadable. Inside, though, every muscle in my body was coiled, every breath measured. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was waiting. And though she couldn't see it, though Eric couldn't see it, though the guests only saw a man standing silent in his own shadow, I knew something they didn't. In moments like these, silence can be louder than any outburst. And soon, everyone would hear it roar. The music swelled from the string quartet in the corner, but it did little to cover the rising murmur of voices circling around us. Every laugh Emily forced, every toss of her hair toward Eric, was carefully designed to sting. It was like she was performing on stage, and I was the unwilling prop meant to absorb the humiliation. She leaned close to him, her hand brushing against his arm as if by accident, though everyone could see it was deliberate. Her voice carried across the table when she said, "Some men just fade in the background, don't they?" A few guests chuckled nervously, their eyes flicking to me, waiting for me to explode or retreat. I did neither. I simply adjusted my cufflink, my gaze steady on the glass in my hand. That silence, that refusal to give her what she wanted, unnerved them more than any outburst could have. The ballroom itself was a monument to wealth and reputation. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. Tables draped in white linen were decorated with tall arrangements of lilies and roses. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between the tables, carrying trays heavy with champagne flutes. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than truth, where every whispered remark could echo louder than a shout. And in that room, I was being painted as the silent fool, the man too timid to fight for his own pride. Eric played his part well. He leaned back in his chair, exuding casual arrogance, as if he had been given permission to take what he wanted without consequence. His smile was smug, the kind that said he enjoyed the spectacle as much as Emily did. He whispered something into her ear, and she laughed again, her hand lingering on his shoulder. Guests nearby pretended to be lost in conversation, but their eyes betrayed them. They were watching, absorbing, waiting. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time. Anger is easy, predictable. What they didn't understand was that stillness can be its own weapon. Every time Emily tried to draw blood with her words, I let the silence swallow her laughter, and in that silence, I saw the unease start to creep into her eyes. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. Then the air shifted. A ripple went through the room, starting at the far end and moving like a wave across the tables. Heads turned, conversations faltered, glasses were lowered mid-sip. My eyes followed theirs to the entrance, and there she was, Claire Parker, Eric's wife. She stood framed by the wide double doors, the light from the hallway behind her. She was striking in her own right, tall, elegant, with dark hair pinned neatly back and a gown of deep blue silk that caught the glow of the chandeliers. But it wasn't just her appearance that made the room pause. It was her presence. Calm, collected, with eyes that seemed to see through the shallow games being played around her. She walked into that room as if she owned it, her heels clicking against the marble, each step measured, deliberate. The tension was instant. Everyone expected a storm. You could feel it in the way bodies shifted, the way whispers spread like sparks across the crowd. Claire's husband was sitting with another man's wife, too close, too familiar. Emily's laughter had been too loud, too eager to wound. Everyone braced themselves for the scene they thought was inevitable. A confrontation, an outburst, a collapse of the polished facade this gathering was meant to project. I stood where I was, unmoving, my glass still in my hand. Emily's laughter faltered for the first time that evening, her eyes darting toward the entrance. I saw her shoulders tense, her smile freeze, the mask she had worn all night starting to crack. Eric shifted in his seat, his smugness fading into something sharper, less confident. He sat up straighter, his smile tight, his hand moving away from Emily's back as if it had suddenly burned him. Claire didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than Emily's laughter had ever been. She crossed the floor slowly, gracefully, every eye in the room following her. The quartet continued to play, but the notes seemed muted, swallowed by the anticipation pressing down on the room. Emily's hand gripped the stem of her glass tighter, her knuckles white. She tried to force another laugh, desperate to reclaim the attention, but the sound fell flat, thin, powerless in the face of Claire's steady approach. Guests leaned toward one another, whispers flying. That's his wife. She must know. This is about to get ugly. Eric cleared his throat, muttered something under his breath, and shifted again, but Claire didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on me, and that was when the energy shifted again. People noticed. The way her gaze never wavered from where I stood. The way she walked past her husband without so much as a glance. The way her expression was calm, unshaken, as if she had planned this moment from the very beginning. Emily noticed too. Her head snapped toward me, her lips parting in confusion, her brows furrowing. For the first time that evening, she wasn't in control. Her weapon, laughter, mockery, humiliation, suddenly felt useless. The power she thought she held slipped through her fingers like water. I remained still, calm, my breathing even. The room held its breath with me, waiting for the eruption they were sure was coming. But they didn't understand. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged, waiting, about to break. And Emily, for all her performance, had no idea that the stage she had built for my humiliation was no longer hers to command. Claire reached the center of the room, her footsteps slowing as she came closer. The whispers grew louder, the anticipation tightening around us like a noose. My wife's hand trembled slightly, the wine in her glass rippling as if it, too, sensed what was coming. The guests leaned in, eyes wide, breaths shallow, knowing they were about to witness something that would be remembered long after the night ended. I held Claire's gaze, steady, calm, and in that moment, the air between us was the only thing in the room that felt real. And then, everything shifted. The moment Claire reached me, the noise of the room seemed to dissolve. I could still see mouths moving, still hear the faint scraping of cutlery and the notes of the quartet, but all of it felt muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the raw certainty that something irreversible was about to happen. She didn't glance at Eric. She didn't so much as acknowledge his presence. Every step she had taken across that ballroom had been a choice, and her choice was me. Emily's confusion was written across her face as clear as ink on a page. Her lips parted, the practiced smile she had worn all night faltering as she realized the attention she craved had been stolen in an instant. She had played her part too loudly, too aggressively, and now she stood exposed. Her glass trembled in her hand, her knuckles pale against the crystal stem. A nervous laugh tried to escape her throat, but it died before it could form into sound. She looked around the room, searching for allies, but every pair of eyes was glued to Claire and me. Claire stopped just inches away, the faint scent of her perfume lingering between us, subtle but powerful. Her hand reached out slowly, deliberately, and she took mine. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't cautious. It was steady, like she had already decided this moment long before the evening began. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, their whispers turning into a current that ran around the tables. My wife's jaw tightened, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling quickly as though she'd been struck. I didn't move. I let Claire's fingers lace through mine, her grip firm, certain. Her gaze held me in place, unwavering, and then she did the unthinkable. She leaned forward, every eye in the room tracking her, and pressed her lips to mine. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shocked cries, even a few muffled laughs burst out from the crowd. Champagne glasses froze midair, forks hovered inches from mouths, and the quartet faltered, their music collapsing into silence before they scrambled to stop playing altogether. The kiss wasn't frantic, it wasn't desperate. It was controlled, confident, a deliberate strike in front of an audience that had been expecting chaos of a very different kind. Emily's glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor, red wine spilling like blood across the white linen of the table. Her scream cut through the room, sharp and ragged, a sound of disbelief and betrayal that silenced even the whispers. Her eyes darted between Claire and me, then toward Eric, whose face had gone pale, his smirk completely gone. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came out. For the first time all evening, he looked small, insignificant, stripped of the arrogance that had carried him until this moment. The guests couldn't contain themselves. Whispers surged, louder now, rushing from table to table. "Did you see that?" She kissed him. What about her husband? What about his wife? Every word added fuel to the fire, and Emily stood at the center of it, her humiliation growing with every second. She had wanted to make me the fool of the evening, but now it was her name, her actions, that spread like wildfire across the room. Claire pulled back slowly, her hands still clasped around mine, her expression unshaken. She didn't look at Emily. She didn't look at Eric. Her gaze remained locked on me, as though the rest of the room didn't exist. But everyone else felt it. The power in that moment had shifted entirely, and the weight of it pressed down on every corner of the ballroom. Emily finally found her voice, though it cracked when it left her throat. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed, her hands slamming down on the table, rattling the silverware. Her face was flushed, her composure shattered. "That's my husband," she shouted, her fingers stabbing the air in my direction. "You can't just—" Her words faltered as the crowd's stares burned into her. She had no control anymore, no audience to charm, no laughter to weaponize. Eric tried to speak, his voice stumbling out weakly. "Claire, this isn't—" But Claire silenced him with nothing more than a glance. She didn't raise her hand, didn't shout, didn't need to. The sheer dismissal in her eyes was enough to crush him where he sat. He lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping, his mouth closing without protest. I finally lifted my glass, my hand steady, and took a slow sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue, sharp, refreshing, a contrast to the tension that gripped the room. I set it down carefully and let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel it. Then I spoke, my voice calm, measured, but carrying clearly across the stunned crowd. "Seems like the evening turned out more interesting than anyone expected." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any accusation could. Emily's face twisted, her anger and humiliation colliding until she looked almost unrecognizable. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to scream, to claw back some shred of control, but it was gone, taken from her the moment Claire had chosen me. The whispers only grew louder, a tide crashing around her. Guests shook their heads, some smirked, some whispered to their partners with gleeful shock. She was drowning in it, and the more she struggled, the deeper she sank. I didn't need to do anything else. My silence, my calmness, had become a weapon sharper than any blade. And standing beside me, Claire had delivered the final strike, leaving Emily stripped of her pride in front of everyone she had tried to impress. The night wasn't over yet. The air was still thick, the tension unbroken. But one thing was clear. Emily would never forget this evening, and neither would anyone else in that room. Emily's scream cut through the ballroom again, louder this time, jagged with desperation. Her face twisted as if she could tear the night back into her control by sheer force of will. She slammed both hands on the table, silver rattling, glasses trembling, and her voice cracked as she spat. "This is a joke. You've lost your mind, Claire." Her eyes darted wildly between me, between Claire, and then back to Eric, as if she could piece together a way to make this humiliation vanish. But the damage was done, and the crowd had already chosen sides with their silence, with their stares. They weren't laughing with her anymore. They were watching her fall. Eric sat rigid, his hands folded tightly, his face pale as if the blood had drained from it. His usual arrogance was gone, stripped bare in the glare of the chandeliers. He looked at his wife but didn't speak, too afraid of what might come out, too aware that no words could repair the blow she had landed. His silence made him smaller, weaker, and the room saw it. Claire didn't move from my side. She stood tall, her posture flawless, her hands still gripping mine with calm certainty. Her face was composed, her eyes unyielding, her very presence a reminder that she wasn't here to explain herself or beg for understanding. She had already spoken louder than words by what she'd done. The whispers kept rising, flowing across the room like a tide, and the more they did, the more Emily shrank under their weight. I let the silence hang for as long as I could, savoring how it pressed down on everyone, how it made them lean forward, desperate for the next move. Then I turned my gaze slowly toward Emily. She froze under it, her breath shallow, her lips trembling as though she was about to cry but refused to let the tears fall. "You wanted me invisible," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "You wanted me small. You wanted everyone here to think I was nothing." I lifted my glass, my hand steady, and looked at her the way you look at someone you've already left behind. "But it turns out you were the only one who believed that." The sound of glass breaking again filled the space as Emily shoved her wineglass to the ground in a fit of rage. Red spilled across the marble floor like a wound spreading out from her feet. She screamed, her voice raw and wild. "You can't do this to me. I am your wife." Her body shook, her fists clenched, her face flushed with humiliation. But no one rushed to her side. Not a single guest reached out a hand. Not even Eric. They just watched. Claire finally turned to her, her expression sharp but controlled. "You paraded your betrayal in front of everyone tonight," she said softly, but every guest heard it. "And now you can live with the consequences of your own performance." Her voice wasn't raised, yet it struck like a whip across the room. Emily recoiled, her eyes filling with panic, her lips parting as if to protest, but no words formed. I straightened my suit jacket, released Claire's hand, and took a step forward, my shoes echoing against the marble floor. Every head followed me, every gaze fixed. Emily staggered back, her body colliding with the edge of the table as though the ground itself was pulling her down. I stopped just short of her, my voice calm, controlled, final. "You mocked me in front of everyone tonight. You wanted to make me small. But now look around." I gestured subtly to the tables, to the stairs, to the sea of judgmental eyes she couldn't escape. "They're not laughing at me. They're laughing at you." Her face crumpled. She tried to find the arrogance that had carried her at the start of the evening, but it was gone. In its place was only fear, only shame, only the sting of realizing that her stage had turned against her. Tears finally broke, streaking her mascara, dripping down her cheeks as her shoulders shook. The sound of her sobs filled the spaces her laughter had occupied just an hour before. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse her or list the things she had done wrong. I didn't need to. My silence had spoken louder. My composure had broken her far more than rage ever could. And standing at my side, Claire had driven the truth home in a way that left no room for doubt. Eric stayed seated, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the table in front of him. He didn't dare meet his wife's gaze. His cowardice, his inability to stand or speak, was its own confession. The guests saw it. They would remember it. His reputation, Emily's pride, both crumbled in that moment under the crushing weight of their own choices. I picked up my glass one last time, raising it just high enough for the room to see. "To silence," I said quietly, my voice calm but carrying across the stunned crowd. "Sometimes it speaks louder than any laugh." I took a sip, set the glass back down, and without another glance at Emily, I turned toward the doors. Claire's heels clicked alongside mine, steady, unwavering, as we walked through the stunned silence. Behind us, I could hear the faint sound of Emily's sobbing, the whispers of the crowd folding over themselves, the rustle of chairs as people leaned closer to one another to capture every last detail they had just witnessed. But I didn't look back. That part of my life was over the moment she chose to make me her target. And in that silence, as I stepped out into the night, I understood the truth fully. Sometimes the most devastating answer you can give isn't anger, isn't defense, isn't even explanation. It's calm. It's quiet. It's letting the truth reveal itself without lifting a hand. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to make me invisible. But in the end, she stood alone in the ruins of her own stage, and I walked away with the last word, even without saying it. If you want more stories where betrayal turns to justice in front of everyone, subscribe, like, and leave a comment.